The lens you got with your camera is starting to frustrate you. You want your photos to look like this, but instead they look like this. You've decided to get a new lens and you've started looking around, but there is so much choice. It's really confusing. What do all those numbers mean, and how do you know you're not going to waste a whole lot of money? In today's video, I'm going to explain to you exactly what those numbers mean. I'll show you how to choose the right lens that matches your camera and fits your shooting style. I'll make sure you don't spend a fortune, and soon you'll be shooting like the pros. Now, one of the reasons that pro photographers' images look so much better, they get those dreamy backgrounds, they're ultra sharp, is they use a thing called a prime lens. Your camera, when you first bought it, chances are you've got a kit lens, which is usually a zoom or a telephoto lens. What that means is the focal length can be varied. Now, the prime lenses that professional photographers use have a fixed focal length. Why do they go down this route? There are a couple of reasons. The image quality is so much better, and they have very wide apertures, which means they can let in a lot of light and get a very shallow depth of field. So how do you know the lens you're looking at meets those criteria? Let me simplify those numbers for you. So the first thing you need to be aware of is what type of camera have you got? And there are two main types of digital SLRs or mirrorless cameras. There's full frame and there's crop sensor. Now, a crop sensor camera is often referred to as an APS-C. The important point to note is, compared to the full frame camera, the crop sensor camera tends to magnify the image by about 1.4 times. Now, the most common prime lens that lots of people buy is called the nifty 50, a 50mm lens. Now, before you rush out and buy one, there's a few things you should be aware of. The reason people like the 50mm lens is it's very close to the focal length of the human eye, so it gives a very natural perspective. However, if you've got a crop sensor camera, then 35mm lens is the equivalent to 50 because of that crop factor. So 1.4 times 35 is very roughly 50. So if you want that natural perspective with a crop sensor camera, a 35mm is the one to go for. There are other things you should consider, so let's get into those. The next number that you'll likely be baffled by when looking at prime lenses is the aperture, shown as an F number, and you'll see numbers like f2.8, f1.4, even f1.2. Now, what that means is it's the maximum aperture the lens can go to. And confusingly, the smaller the number, the bigger the aperture. One other thing to bear in mind, the smaller the number, the bigger the price. Now, having those very wide apertures means you can let in a lot more light, and it also means your depth of field, that's the amount of your image that will be in focus from the foreground to the background, is determined by that F number. So the smaller that number, the shorter the depth of field. So that's how you get those really dreamy backgrounds, because with very wide apertures, only the thing that you focus on is likely to be in focus. The rest of it will go out of focus. As I mentioned, one of the downsides of those wide apertures is the price. If you want something that is a good compromise, I'd recommend you go for something like f1.8, because that'll still give you pretty narrow depth of focus and it'll perform well in low light. One other thing you should consider is the really wide aperture lenses are a bit bulkier and heavier. So if you're going to carry it around all day, weight is something you need to think about and decide whether it's too bulky and too heavy for you, and you're going to compromise by getting a slightly narrower aperture. Then we need to think about our shooting style and the kind of subjects we get excited about photographing. And there's one very easy way to check what is your favorite focal length. Let me show you how to do that now. Go to your library module in Lightroom and select all photographs. Now you need to filter those. If you haven't got the filter menu showing, press the / key. What we're going to choose is metadata. Now you need to go to one of the columns. I'm going to click on this one, label, and I'm going to change label to focal length. Now you can see I've used a mixture of 296 focal lengths. I've got about 115,000 photos here. But if I scroll down, I can now get to 50mm, for example, 50. Now I actually have a prime lens that is 55. So what I can do is by pressing the shift key now, I'm going to select all the lengths between 50 and 55. Now you have to add those up manually, but you can see I've got 4, probably 5, plus another 4.5. So something like 9,500 photos that I've shot at 50 millimeters. If I wanted to compare that with, let's say, 35, I actually have a 35 millimeter lens. I've also got a couple of zoom lenses, a 16 to 35 and a 24 to 70, so that will capture some of the data from those, and you can see I've shot 7,000 at 35. So I'm using both those focal lengths very commonly. Now, if I'm thinking about my own photographic style, I might want to then filter on date. So perhaps something I've done in the last year or last 2 years. So let me select 2024 and 2025. And now I can go back and check the focal lengths again. And you can see now at 35 millimeters, I've shot 270. And let's see what I've done in that range of 50 to 55, somewhere around 300 or 400. So again, it's still quite similar. So either choice would be good for me. So it's really down to what I'm most comfortable with and which I would think would become my favorite. Now, if you don't have something like Lightroom, you can do this with a basic photo editing package. I'm just going to open up Photos, because that's what comes with a Mac. You'll have to use the equivalent in Windows if you have that. Go to your library of photos, choose a photo and get the information about it. Sometimes this will be displayed at the bottom when you open the photo, or you might have to right click to get the info. And what this is doing is reading what's called the EXIF data, and you can see this was shot at 48 millimeters. It's actually been shot on an Apple iPhone. The next one up here, I can do the same thing. Again, this one has been shot wide angle, 24 millimeters. Now, to make your life easy, because it's pretty laborious to go through every photo and keep a log of what you want to use, I would choose a selection of your best photos in the photographic style that you feel you're passionate about and that you're going to use going forward, and check those, and that'll give you a very good idea of which focal length you favor. And that's the obvious one to buy a prime lens for. Now we've got a good idea of what focal length we want. We've worked out what aperture we can afford. Now we're homing in on exactly the lens we want. If you're shooting things like portraits where you want to get a lot of the environment with a full frame camera, that might be 35 or even 28 millimeters. If you're out shooting things like street photos, then you probably want to get a little bit closer, and that natural perspective of a 50 millimeter would work really well for you. Choose the nifty 50. If you're going for a crop sensor camera, then the 35 millimeter will give you the same look. But if you're somebody who likes to shoot portraits close in all the time, you know, head and face shots or close-up body shots, then you'll want something even longer. Typical portrait lenses are around about 100 millimeters, and you'll find a variety of options from 85 right up to 105. When you've homed in on that choice, if you're still struggling to get something within your budget, don't forget to look at the second-hand market. There's some great bargains out there, and I actually think second-hand lenses are really great value, because lens technology doesn't evolve quite as fast as camera technology. So even though you might be buying something a few years old, it's probably still got great optical performance. So now you've got a good idea of which lens to choose, but you still need to learn how to take great photos. That's why I've created a full ebook which will give you 50 tips to help you improve your photography. It's completely free to download, and there's a link in the description. Let's turn you into a great photographer, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.